You know, there are 3 things I hate. The third one, I forgot. The first one is Nancy, obviously. The second one are the French. The hatred of the French is innate to any intellectual creature and set free upon first contact. It were, after all, the veterans and survivors of the greatest atrocities of the 20th century, those that survived French culture and their concept of femininity, who founded the UN with the sole goal of protecting the world from the French. The French were among the founding members, as even the French hate the French. Attempts to reintegrate them into society by pairing them with only the finest American specimen failed, and Canada succumbed to the beastly half-breeds. Therefore, we shall travel back to the past and right the wrongs of history. I heartily welcome you to the Post-Natal of a Nation. Today, we're going to be playing Europa Universalis 4, and our goal is to eradicate the entire population of a certain breed of West European poultry. For that purpose, we're going to be playing as the Archbishopric of Trier. Why Trier, you may ask? Because as bishopric, they are not reliant on the untested intricacies of the female reproductive process of pitiable maidens who were outsourced to those with the highest potency, which truly makes the rulers of Trier divinely based. EU4 starts off by having the player pick between hundreds of nations that existed in the year 1444. Each nation exists in a historically accurate state, but what happens once you press the start button is up to you. As the name implies, Europa Universalis 4 mostly revolves around Europe, but a bunch of pricey DLCs have also made gameplay in other regions of the world more spicy. As a leader of your own proud nation, it is up to you to forge alliances, control the economy, engage in diplomacy, and most importantly, expand. EU4 as such does not have a goal. You simply play until the year reaches 1821 or until your nation has fallen. Therefore, it is up to the player to make up their own goals. Control all of America as Inca? There's even an achievement for that. Peacefully bring the true faith to Africa? Thy will be done. The choices truly are endless. The game's key gameplay elements you will learn to observe at all times are as follows. Money, manpower, the amount of recruits you have left to reinforce your army, seaman power, stability. Extremely important to keep this as high as possible so you don't have to deal with deviating political ideas every month. Corruption, the direct opposite of the calming sound of prestige, the amount of street cred you have in your local parish. Too little and nobody will accept to call you by your new street name, Kaiser of Koblenz. Wow, I really made that joke, huh? And power projection. The amount of pure, aggressive, big boy energy that emanates from your prolonged virginity, mostly gained by bullying your rivals. Last but not least, administrative, diplomatic, and military power. These increase at the beginning of every month, and managing them is the key to managing a successful country. You need them to keep up with the newest technology, resolve many random events, and to sustainably develop your nation. Let me give you an example of what it means to lead a prospering nation in EU4. You have to manage your estates, their influence, satisfaction, and privileges, enforce religious unity, facilitate cultural acceptance, manage overextension, rebels, and your neighbors, allies, and enemies' opinions. It's very complex. If you want to know if the game is fun for yourself, try out the demo version. Simply throw it against your wall and stare at it intensely while the color of your choice slowly trickles towards covering every inch of your wall. If you find enjoyment in this task for somewhere in between 20 and 70 hours, then boy, do I got a game for you. In order to be able to pose a serious threat to my sworn enemies, I first had to grow. Accordingly, I got myself some friends and started my first conquest. The enemies were quickly overwhelmed, so I was now in control of the Bergian Bergberg, or the Bergian Bergberg, but never the Bergian Bergberg. Brrr. I also managed to vassalize Hesse. So far so good. My neighbors, however, were not as pleased by this conquest as I was, so they promptly formed a coalition and declared a punitive war on me. The war didn't go too badly, that is, until I lost all of my troops. At this point, I had no other option but to pull out my Greek gamer tactics, plunging my nation into crippling debt for years to come to afford some professional outside help. With all the help money could buy, my mercenaries fought a series of proxy battles to ensure my well-being. Unfortunately, the only interests the national banks seemed to have in this affair seemed those regarding my loans. At the same time, the French had already nicked several provinces from the English. I had to expand faster. Next, I guzzled up some more provinces, including Hesse and Color! And I managed to secure alliances with two of the most powerful players in Western Europe, England and Spain. Once again, France outsped me and won a war against Austria over the succession to the Burgundian throne. Spain and England were useful to have as deterrents, but I needed someone nearby that could help me expand even faster. I needed a friend. Thankfully, only a few provinces away, the proud nation of Thuringia had been vassalized by the greedy Saxons. I unselfishly supported their struggle for independence, and they soon called me to their side when they declared war on their oppressors. A bit of gameplay later, and I had myself an independent ally that now owed me a bunch of favors. My next war went pretty smoothly, but I had only been able to add a single province to my nation in fear of another coalition forming against me, only to then accidentally return it to its original owners when Daddy Kaiser told me to. It was only fitting that someone with such an enormous intellect as myself would be gifted with a university in my capital. Severely intimidated and consumed by jealousy, the French warned me not to become any more based, or, as the Germans called it, basiert. Naturally, I kept expanding. But what even was my plan here? You see, in EU4 there are three main lines of defense to your nation. The first is your own military. The second are your subordinate nations, vassals for example. And the third are your allies. The further out the enemy attacks, the less of a loss it is to you. In order to get to the heart of our nemesis defensive nut, we needed to strengthen all of these so that we could break through theirs. We shall be as seconds to their circles. Moving on, I tried peacefully vassalizing the nation of Baden. For this purpose, I funded their economy to increase their opinion of me, only for them to decline, citing their prosperous economy as the reason. Hence, I returned to politely asking other nations to hand over their provinces or suffer the consequences. Weirdly, after I gifted my bestie Thuringia the last provinces of their former overlords, Saxony, they instantly decided to form Saxony. At some point, the French took over most of the Provence and now had a direct border connection to me. The invasive, watery blue, representing the water which kept their royalties afloat, insulted my eyes with every gaze I took on my proud nation. All the more did this create the urge in me to turn this flowery sea into my backyard pond. The French, however, were also busy expanding. They declared war on the nation of Liège and their ally, England. It didn't take long for Spain to follow and, with me in tow, declare war on the French. Soon, armies of Frenchmen were crossing our borders and intruding upon my territory. Narrowly, I managed to repel them in battle, after which they fucked off to the other side of Europe and let us overrun their nation without resistance. Now, before Spain was able to broker a peace treaty with the French that would not ascribe any French provinces to my proud nation, I pieced out of the war and took Luxembourg with me. Beaten and completely occupied by their enemies, the French still knew me for their greatest enemy and warned me again. I laughed it off, but deep down I knew that even in this state, I couldn't beat them. During our little dispute, the age of Reformation had begun. This led to Reformation centers sprouting throughout Europe and turning righteous, God-loving citizens into insufferable heathens that threatened the divine order of my state. Under no circumstances could I approve of their existence or, even worse, convert to their faith. After all, we are playing as a bishopric whose most famous office-bearer was one of the most notorious witch hunters of his time. He even wrote a book on the subject that, for a time, became the standard for professional witch hunting. With my unwillingness to concede, a little icon notified me of something. A catastrophe was looming over my nation, caused by a lack of religious unity. In what I can only call a pro-gamer move, I spent all of my power on upgrading my administrative technology level instead of researching an idea that increased religious unity. The catastrophe was creeping ever closer to my nation, and I knew of no way to prevent it. I was in big trouble. Or so I thought until I activated a random national decision and it all went away, never to be mentioned again. The hounds of war were unleashed once more upon Europe, and I was smack in the middle. In pursuit of our ultimate goal, I had to break bonds with my former brothers-in-arms from Saxony. as they had allied themselves with our greasy nemesis. This cost them dearly, as I overran the nation I had helped to create. The English agreed with me as they forced the Saxons to fund the Anglo-Saxon economy with Saxon money. Turning westward, the famous French battle strategies of not even showing up to the fight allowed us to occupy their entire nation without a single battle. England settled for modest terms, as did the Spanish after them. The aftermath of this war proved to be much less advantageous than I had previously imagined. A border conflict later and the English broke up with me, and here I thought we'd go to prom together. They then went on to tell the Spanish that I liked to have fiesta during siesta, which meant that I had to turn eastward, where I found the toxic relationship to my childhood drama, the Commonwealth. I had been playing with the idea of founding a colony in South America lately, since that's what the French had done, and with England guaranteeing the French independence until their peace treaty had run out, this seemed to be the only chance for me to actually get to my nemesis. Unfortunately, the honeymoon with my little CM stands for cheese muffin, had ended, and their destructive tendencies dragged me headfirst into a war against the Ottoman Empire. I was a fool to stand by them, as it didn't take long for them to not only strip me of my clothes in front of the lecherous Ottomans, but also of 2/3 of my army. With my manpower and dignity dwindling to the size of a burned bratwurst, I needed to retreat and recuperate. But through my sacrifices, the relationship with my little cheese muffin would endure after all. Alone, my manpower dwindling ever further, I stood against overwhelming odds. Once again, I had to rely on my signature Greek gamer tactics, but this time, I went for the 100% full completion true ending route. I employed the best help money can buy, and for a time, they served me well. I needed more. While I was gathering together with recruits and money I still had left, the enemy was occupying all of my provinces and thereby sent my economy into anti-Stonks territory. It wasn't looking good, and I knew that the troops I had at the moment would be my last. I managed to push my enemies back just enough to maybe have a chance. That was when the game kindly notified me that I had almost reached the true Greek ending. With no regard for human life, I charged into the enemy's ranks and made it all the way back to the coalition leader's capital. If I could just take Strasbourg, maybe, just maybe I could increase the war score just enough to force a white peace. I took the city and desperately tried suing for peace. Almost. A single battle, another fortified province, anything would be enough to tip the scales. My mercenaries departed, my own units lost their will to fight and were obliterated. My debts were remitted, and I was powerless to act. As the coalition strode through my once proud nation, I wondered if this had really been what I had started all of this for. Bleeding and entirely occupied, I gazed over at my sworn nemesis, soon to be devoured by Anglo-Saxon hunger. I was never to achieve my original goal, never to fight toe-to-toe with the French. But maybe the Cosmic Order always had other things for me in mind. The French would soon be gone, and that was all that mattered. After the coalition granted my nation peace, I returned what provinces they hadn't back to their original owners. As for myself, I retreated into my university and studied the divine principles of baseness. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you and hope you had a good time. If you'd like to see more, let me know with a like, comment and subscribe. And until then, stay sharp.